welcome to The Finder of Lost Things, exploring your superpowers of trust, healing and transformation, with me, Hannah Belton. My brother, Christian, disappeared in Mali, Africa in 2003. He disappeared without a trace. We lost his story, we didn't have closure, we lost so much. I was fighting and searching to find Christian when actually I just needed to sit in stillness and attract him in. I was so resistant to doing this, but I had to surrender. It's a process of trusting and finding the lost pieces and integrating them. This podcast will uncover the process that Christian and I went on to find the lost things, him, and to find the parts of me that were missing.
And we were destined from the start to tell our story into the dark, for we were born to a great white shark.
Hello, welcome, come on in as usual. Come and sit in the circle. I've got an amazing story to tell you today, an amazing guest. I want to tell you a little bit about how I met Karen Chaston. Christian was definitely involved on the other side, bringing us together. And I was reading a Facebook post, and the person I was watching was talking about this, one of these, online seminars that everyone's doing. I'm part of it. So I thought, that's an unusual way of saying that you're part of a summit. So I looked at this summit and I was looking down the list of guests, and there was this lady smiling, and next to it, her tagline was the gift of loss. And I sort of looked at it and I thought, that's exactly what I kind of think about loss, in the long term. Now I've been through it all. And I'll read you what the little intro was. Life's too short to be spent grieving and suffering. Karen Chaston explores the deeper purpose of grief in our lives, teaching us to find the treasures and reminding us of the wisdom that comes through the transitions of life. And then she asks, will you let go of your suffering? I was like, I've got to meet this lady. This is somebody I have to meet. So I emailed her out of the blue, and we just had this sort of conversation. And it turns out that her son, Dan, and Christian are in cahoots as usual. This is how Christian does it. He brings me lovely people into my life who can help me, who can support, who can bounce ideas off, who we can work together. And this is, I'd like to introduce you to Karen Chaston from the Chaston Centre. Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're on the Gold Coast in Australia.
Yes, I am. And it's 7 p.m, or I probably shouldn't say what time it is, but I'm in the evening and you're in the morning, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
I still love the world we live in, the way we can so easily connect.
I know this podcast is literally connecting me to a global audience and global guests that come on. I mean, it's amazing. I'm so excited about how the energy around it is rising and we're reaching more and more people. It's amazing. So I've sort of looked at your website, but we really wanted to keep this a really fresh conversation so that, you and myself and Dan and Christian can sort of bring in the magic and the energy into this conversation. So do you want to just sort of tell me about Dan, or where would you like to start?
Well, I guess it's Dan and Christian that have really brought us together. So let's start with Dan. So in 2011, Dan was a 27-year-old young man who had been back in Australia for 2 years after being in the UK, believe it or not, travelling around and having an amazing time, as most Australians love to do. The young ones love to do their 2 years overseas and just see the world. And it's so good that he actually did that. And on this night, he actually, when he came back to Australia 2 years in 2009, he brought back an English lady with her, and she still lives in Australia 10 years later. So she's been in Australia for 12 years. So Dan went out by himself with some mates on the 10th of July 2011. His girlfriend had gone out separately. She had a work due on. He didn't want to go to that. And then he came home late. For some reason, he left his key at home. So he rang his girlfriend and said, just leave the key out for me. He lived under our house. We were living in Sydney at the time. And he lived under our house, not like a Harry Potter under our house. He literally had like a granny flat under our house sort of thing. And he came home. Yes, he had drunk way too much. But what happened was he walked down the back of the house, walked under, went to pick up the key. And as he bent down, he fell over and everything did shake up inside of him. And for a long time, I thought it was the alcohol that had killed him, just the shaking up of it. But he told me it was probably about 3 years later, that it was actually his lungs that had failed him. And at the autopsy the next day, they had actually told us that his lungs were so bad that, you know, if he had smoked full on for, say, 10, 12 years, which he hadn't, he was only a social smoker, he couldn't have done a quarter of the damage that he had done to his lungs. Now, Dan is a twin, and we don't know if his lungs were like that all his life. I guess you don't sort of expect that. But he had, when he was in Scotland 2 years previously, had spent a week in hospital with pneumonia. So whether it was from that, I'm not really sure. So my husband and I woke the next morning not realising any of this had happened. And my husband, literally, we slept in late Sunday morning, and he went out the back door to take the rubbish out, and he really quickly just called out. He was really angry, going, bloody hell, Dan's asleep, passed out at the back door, you know, really angry. But we thought he was still alive. He was lying there in the fetal position and there was saliva coming out of his mouth, so we just thought he was unconscious. But the paramedics arrived really quickly and they literally just said, sorry, madam, he's dead and probably has been for several hours. Which, of course, was a huge shock. You know, we literally thought a healthy 27-year-old had gone out the night before. If I'd known that, I wouldn't have given him the $200 that I gave him to go out with, that's for sure. But, you know, and sure, you know, nearly 10 years on, we can joke about it. But at the time, I don't know how to deal with loss. You know, I was a CFO of a publicly listed company and I knew how to do that. So that's what I did. I literally went straight back to work the day after his funeral, working more, eating more, and drinking even more. And that's, you know, isn't that what we tell people to do? Just keep busy, just give it time, everything will be all right. And of course, it doesn't. It just, we go into avoidance. You know, I was working more, you know, drinking more, eating more, doing the whole lot. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about it now, in hindsight, Dan's passing was meant to have been my wake-up call, because what I'm doing now, how I've deep dived into loss and how I understand it, and, you know, I am a life coach who specialises in loss, what I realised is it was meant to be my wake-up call. And because I didn't wake up from it, from my what I call my Groundhog Day days, which I'm pretty sure most people in corporate are living in. You know, we're just in that grind of every day is the same. And this is what success is all about, not realising that, no, it's not what success is all about. Mm-hmm. So they had to send me another loss event. So 15 months after Dan passed, the next loss came in the form of me having to choose with the company that I was working for to either go with the newly merged company, not as CFO, but doing everything you're doing now plus more, quote, for less money, for like 2/3 of my salary. And I was really angry. I thought, how dare you treat me like this? You know, I've got emails from you telling me I'm the oracle of the company. I set the standard on how to work and all this sort of stuff. But within 48 hours, I had so much gratitude because I really did start to wake up from that daze. And I very quickly realized, you know what, I'm only there for the money and I'm killing myself over this money that, if I'm honest, I'm wasting most of it just to earn it, which is that vicious cycle that so many of us get into. So, as I said, that boss, and believe it or not, his name was also Dan, he actually gave me the greatest gift you can ever give anyone else because I chose me. And that's when I started on this journey, which I started off calling the journey to becoming my own best friend, because I had to get me right. Before I could help anyone else, I had to get me right. I had to deep dive into loss. I was just so driven to look for a better way to do it because we're not doing loss very well at all. We just don't know what to do. No one knows what to say. No one wants to be around it. Everyone's sort of fearful of it. And that's sort of my journey. And I just love it. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Gosh, that's a brilliant roundup of the last goodness knows how many years. But yeah, so like it really struck me because Christian's birthday is the 7th of July and Dan passed on the 10th of July. And I know Christian and I spent a lot of time in Australia in our gap years as well. We were there separately, but doing similar things. And Christian was at university in Scotland at Edinburgh. So
oh wow.
Yeah. So I suspect
I just got
Dan.
Shivers.
Yeah. So I think there's plenty of connections here between the boys. So Dan's Dan has a twin as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he has a twin and an older brother.
Okay, so how did I'm quite interested in the sort of family dynamics of when Dan died so suddenly, how that sort of affected the family, because you obviously went straight back out to work.
Yeah.
Do you know how it affected the family?
Well, I'm going to surmise, right, because obviously a lot of them talk about it. So just to get it into context, okay. So we were living in Sydney. So there was Dan, his girlfriend, my husband and I, we were living in Sydney. On the Gold Coast were my two other sons. And at that stage, they didn't have a girlfriend. Neither of them had a girlfriend or a long-term girlfriend. And at that stage, my oldest son, Ben, he was a month off 30, and Josh was obviously the same as Dan, 27. And so on the day that it happened, I obviously rang my boys. Like literally we went upstairs once the police and the ambulance were there. We went upstairs and my husband just said, I just want to sit. And I'm like, no, I've got to get my boys here. I've got to do a whole lot. So, and they also have a half sister. So the half sister is my daughter, who I adopted out when I was 16, but she's in our lives. And at that stage, she was not in our lives like she is now, but she is in our life, like she was in our life. So I wanted to ring her mainly for the fact that I just didn't want to see her in 6 months' time, which is what we sort of tended to do. And then she say, well, how are the boys? And I say, well, I didn't want to say, well, Dan's, died, obviously. So I sort of rang them all and it was really funny, I couldn't get a hold of his twin. He wasn't answering the phone and he was like really, really panicking. And they lived at our property that we had on the Gold Coast where the kids grew up. And it was a 5-acre property in the hinterland of the Gold Coast. Really great place for 3 boys to grow up. And Josh was living there with a couple of mates and stuff. So Ben, our oldest one, went to try and find Josh because I got a hold of Ben, and Ben was actually in a car about to go motorbike riding. They were all like, trail bike riding. And he was driving. I said, Ben, pull over. And he goes, no, Mum, I'm driving. I said, Ben, pull over the car now. I have to tell you something. So he reluctantly pulled it over and he had 3 other people in the car and they all knew Dan. And when I told them, he said they sat there for about 5 minutes, all of them crying because they were like, sort of thing. So what happened was Josh was actually on a golf course and his phone was ringing and he kept missing it. And then Ben eventually got hold of him. sort of thing. And he was like, no. And then Josh rang me, and I said, oh, Josh, I've been trying to get you. And I told him, and he goes, now don't lie, Mum. And I said, no, it's true. And he goes, yeah, I know. Ben's already told me. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? He goes, because I was hoping you were mucking around.
Oh.
So it affected the boys a lot more than probably what we all realised. And, like Dan's girlfriend, she stayed living with us for 18 months after he passed. And I guess the three of us together because we were the three that sort of saw him, I guess, lying there, if that makes sense. So we were in a big hurry the next day when we went to the autopsy to see him again, because we wanted to get that image sort of out of our minds, sort of thing. Whereas the others weren't as keen as coming in. But yeah. So yeah. It's it's never easy. And I think sometimes siblings are sort of missed in the equation. Obviously most people say to me, oh, how's his twin? And I always answer, yeah, both his brothers are fine, because sure, they were twins, but he also has an older brother as well. So yeah.
Yeah. From my point of view, I know siblings often get
they do. It's the
forgotten
parent
in the heat of the moment. Yeah, the parents are the focus.
The thing that I, really want to say is that one of the greatest gifts that we sort of got from Dan's passing was the comments that we got from his work colleagues, from people that he had met overseas. Like he worked in a pub for a couple of years where he met his girlfriend that he brought back. He worked in this pub in Kent, and the landlord, when he heard that Dan had died, he went to bed for the afternoon. And we had the privilege of actually travelling there and meeting the landlord and his wife, because Dan just raved about this guy. He was amazing. He took Dan under his wing. He took him to Lord's. But Dan said he was the most interesting person that he'd ever met. And to hear other people, the way they talk about your son, because you never know. You never know that, what they do. So I guess that's probably, now that I'm mentioning that, it's really interesting. I never really put that into like my books and stuff. Or maybe I have and I've just forgotten about it. But it's just so beautiful to know that, you've raised a child who, for example, Dan was a carpenter, and one of the guys on the building site where he was working when he passed said to us, Dan would walk in every morning, he would walk the whole site, he'd say good morning to everyone, and then he'd get to work.
Oh.
I know. And, just little things like that you never realise and you never know. But another thing I want to tell you about is, as I said before, we didn't really know what was Dan's, what was his cause of death. It was a bit up in the air, and even the autopsy report, it wasn't really like that specific. So in 2014, I was writing a book which is called Beyond a Mother's Worst Nightmare, which was my journey at that stage. I think it was like 3 years or 4 years since Dan had passed. And I wrote this book, and then I sent it to a friend of mine in America, and I said, look, I've been guided to send it to you. Can you just read it before I finish? And she went, yeah, sure. And then she emails me. And she goes, Karen, I've been told to stop reading. And I went, what do you mean? And she goes, well, Dan's come to visit me and he's told me to stop reading. And I went, why? And she goes, well, he wants to have a three-way conversation with you because you don't know all the facts. And I said, oh, okay, well, how am I going to do that? And she said, well, I'm going to facilitate it. But he wants a couple of ground rules set. And so, I said, oh, yeah, sure. We set the ground rules and we did it. So we had this three-way conversation. And in the three-way conversation, he said to me, Mum, stop telling everyone that it was the alcohol that caused my death. And I said, well, what was it, Dan? And he said, it was my lungs. So then I went, oh, okay, well, I didn't know that. And he goes, nah. And he said, and I said, so did you suffer? And he went, no, it wasn't too bad. He said, I said, did you know you were dying? He went, yes. So he lay there for a little while, and I went, going to cry because I don't tell the story very often. I said, so I'm so sorry we were in the front bedroom and we weren't there with you. And he went, don't worry, Mum, you all still travelled, you and Dad. You were both there when I passed. Now, isn't that amazing? Because I literally went, I knew we hostel travelled, but I didn't know that we actually helped our loved ones to pass while we're in our sleep. And it was just so comforting. And I know probably a lot of your viewers are going to go, that's just way too weird. But you know what? It's not weird. It's so comforting to think that, you know, so many times you go, oh, I should have been there, or I should have done this, and why? But when you realise that you actually are there and you're actually travelling to see them when you sleep at night, sure, you may not consciously remember, but unconsciously you do know that you are with your loved ones and they're with you. And, you know, that's why I do what I do, because so many people get caught up in the what if, why didn't I, you know, and they have all these regrets, whereas it's like, no, everything is as it's meant to be. And that's why I call my whole programs the gift of loss. And the gift isn't in the actual loss event. Like, there was no gift in Dan dying. The gift came in who I became because of him dying. And it's all about you, and it's all about your life. And sure, people will come into it and people will go, and it's really sad to lose your loved ones. But when you know that you are going to be greeted by them when you actually move into the next realm and go into your next adventure, it really does make life a lot easier. And like, I don't fear death. I just go, oh, well, I'm just going to leave everyone here and I'm going to leave my body behind and, you know, anything else that I've accumulated. And then I just go off and I get greeted and I have a party and then I do my life. If that all makes sense.
Yeah. The astral travel, I mean, our audience are open-minded, you know. I've been talking about all these things for ages, so they're used to it. But the astral travel, I astral traveled to Christian when he was ill before he actually died. Can completely, and I didn't know it at the time, obviously. So
you weren't conscious of it at the time?
No, but Christian, having done my trance mediumship with Christian and the work that we do now, he's told me that I was there with him, comforting him. And I actually had lucid dreams about this much later in 2015 when we actually made a connection. So, like, completely understand that. And it is comforting. It is.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so comforting, you know, like, especially when it was like, oh my God, you're at the back on the cement, literally at our back door, dying. We're in the front, fast asleep. You know, it was 2:30 or something when he passed AM. So it was literally like, oh my God, that's so comforting. Mm-hmm. You know, and the funny thing is, when I woke up that morning before we even found Dan, my brother and I were estranged at the time. We'd had a silly fight probably about 15 months before Dan passed, and we weren't talking to each other, just, you know, both of us, no, you've got to apologise, you know, all that crap. And I had someone whisper as I woke up, I had a whisper in my ear, you're going to see Tony soon.
Oh, I've got chills.
Yeah.
Like massive.
And I literally was like, not sure how that's going to happen, but okay. You know, and it was just literally like that. And it was just a fleeting thing that came in like that and then just so went. So I know it was him.
So you did.
And then I see my brother, 4 days later, obviously, at his funeral. So, yeah.
And have you managed to sort out your relationship with your brother?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if we can go right.
Another gift. So,
exactly. I have it with the clients. I have a lot of that. You know, their loved ones saying, like, you need to sort this relationship out, or you need to anyway, that's another subject. But if we go back to when you, like, literally after the funeral, going straight back to work for you. You were just saying, like, the grief, you didn't know how to handle it, didn't know what to do. So you just sort of threw yourself back into what you knew.
Yeah. Well, I knew how to do that. I knew how to be a CFO. I didn't know how to be a grieving mother, didn't want to be a grieving mother. Like, you know, this is it. You just, your whole concept and your whole, because we've never really been taught how to deal with loss. right? Which is what I am trying to, I'm not going to say trying, that's not a very good word. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Is I'm helping people to find a better way. And I literally, so Dan passed on the Sunday morning. On the Tuesday, I literally went into work. His funeral was a Friday. I literally went into work just to clean up a couple of things. But I remember saying to myself, I'm going in there so everyone can just say, I'm sorry and get over it, and they never have to say it again, which was totally ridiculous. But that was my way of thinking. I just want to get all of that over with. And and of course, it's ridiculous how you try and control things like that where there is no control. So
then you had the job kind of, and that was your moment of, okay, so talk me through that. What was your moment of something's going to give here?
When I you mean when I was made redundant, when I chose university? Yeah. So, it was just, I was so angry. Like, but I was already starting to think like the guy who was going to be my boss. How old was I? I was probably about 54 at that stage. And I was literally thinking, I'm at an age where I am so sick and tired of people taking credit for my work, people being paid extra for my work. I was a CFO, so I was being paid for my work, and I had, and I'm not even going to say the recognition for it, but I just knew that what I did was, everyone was aware Karen did that. And it wasn't about the glory of Karen did it. It was just a fair exchange. I do the work, you recognise I do the work, and you pay me for it. Thank you. Whereas in my previous roles, and I'm pretty sure, and this happens to women a lot, but it also happens to men too, you have your boss, taking credit for the work that you do, taking the bigger salary than what you do. And I just thought, I'm at a stage in my life where it's just not going to happen anymore. So even before they gave me my contract, I was starting to think they're picking my brains. I really don't know if I really even want to be here after it. Things are going to change. I will have literally no say in the way, things will be handled. So I was already thinking, maybe. And then that's why I say they really did give me the gift of giving me a contract with 2/3 of my salary in there. And as I said, I was angry. I was really angry for probably about 48 hours. I was like, how dare they treat me like this? Who do they think I am? But then I very quickly started to really start to go into me, which, as we know, that's where all your answers are. I don't know why we don't look there. We're looking everywhere else except for there most of the time. And I started to get that Dan passed, nothing happened. Are you seriously going to, if you take this job, you will be dead within 5 years. It's going to eat you from the inside out. I was aware even then that stress causes cancer, and I just knew that it would cause something, whether it was a heart attack, a stroke, type 2 diabetes, who knows. And I literally was like, it's going to eat you from the inside out, and you're going to have to keep your mouth shut. And, and you're not going to be able to keep your mouth shut, and you'll be on less money, and it'll be this and it was us. And it's like, I'm at a stage in my life that I really don't want this. So it became a really, really easy decision in the fact that when I went to work on the Monday, all I did was make a whole lot of phone calls to employment lawyers and stuff like that to make sure that if I said no to this contract, I still got my redundancy, because that was really important. Because my contract, it was 6 months redundancy. So I really wanted to make sure I got paid all of that. And it did, and then I resigned, and they were, my boss was, I can't believe you resigned. And I just went, well, it's the best thing. And it was really strange because I did have to work out some of that time, and he couldn't look me in the eye, and it was really, really sad. And I kept saying to him, you've given me the best gift you could ever give anyone. Don't feel guilty about not fighting for me, because believe me, it's the best thing you ever did for me. And that's when I knew, and I knew really, really quickly, that I wasn't going to be an accountant in the way that I had been an accountant. I knew I was going to do something different. I had no idea what it was going to be, but I just knew that it was like I had just turned a new page. in my book of life. Well, that sounds very poetic, doesn't it?
Did you know at that time? So you have an idea that something big is going to happen. Were you talking to Dan at that point? What was your sort of relationship?
Not like I do now. And look, I get more feelings and he drops ideas into my head. So I've always been quite spiritual. Like I went to my first reading when I was like 21. I was brought up Catholic and I sort of knew, no, that's not right, but it does have some elements of it. So I did always believe in a higher being and all those sort of things. So when so 2001, one of my sisters, I grew up in a large family. So there's 7 children, 6 girls, and then the boy's the baby. And yes, he is the golden child. And so I'm the third eldest. And my sister, who's like a couple of years older than me, her and I are quite spiritual in our beliefs and always have been, where the rest of the family aren't so much. But she read this book, which was Sylvia Browne's Life on the Other Side. And I read it in 2001, and that was my very, very first what I call knowing book, which is, as I read it, I've never heard this before, but I know it's right. You know, every single page, everything about it. And then when Dan passed in so unexpectedly, a lot of people weren't coping with it. So I actually bought 10 copies of that book and I handed it out to the people. I said, read this. It's like we've got a little insight into what Dan's going through at this time, which was amazing, absolutely amazing. And so that was sort of my first thing, and I knew he was with me, but I thought I had to wait 6 months before I could go for him, whereas now I know that they can talk to you as soon as they die whereas I just thought it was a time thing. And this was 2011, so I wasn't as aware as what I am now. So when I had my 6-month reading, I did it with a lady, her name's called Georgina Walker. And she's quite a well-known medium and psychic in Sydney. She's on like one of the radio stations, one of the big ones. And anyway, so I went to her. The reading was so amazing and so graphic that she actually said to me, Karen, I'm writing my 3rd book. And believe it or not, it's been delayed for some reason, obviously, for you to be able to write a chapter of your reading. And she wrote a chapter on this reading, and it was just so amazing. Everything that he said was just so spot on. I could relate to everything that she said. Like he went, I'm going camping at Easter and I'm going to win. And she goes, and I went, yeah, I know what that means. And what it was, just very quickly so that your listeners can actually know. So the year before Dan passed, at Easter, my husband and the 3 boys were going to go to Peru, and they were going to do the Inca Trail. But they left it too late to book, and they said, okay, we'll all go next year. So then when Dan passed, they said, oh, what are we going to do? And we went, still go. I said, look, Dan will be with you. So Dan went, that's what he was referring to. I'm going camping at Easter, and that's exactly where they were. They were camping at Easter. He did appear a couple of times to them. He appeared to my husband and Ben, not to Josh. But then I've heard that Josh blocks him because it's too painful, which makes sense. So it was just that was one of them. And there was she just kept flying them at us. All of these, everything he said, I went, yeah, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. So much so that he actually said, because obviously he's a twin, so he's always shared his birthday. So he said, and Josh jokingly, I can't remember if it was the day that he died or the next day, just to ease the situation, Josh goes, well, on a brighter side, I get double presents now, just trying to ease the sort of tension in the room. And we all just went, huh. And Dan, 6 months later, he goes, Josh can have the double presents, but I still want my cake. And Georgina just looked at me and she went, just get him a little cupcake with a candle. And she went, oh, no, he wants a proper cake. So every year on his birthday, we give him a cake. And we sing happy birthday to him and we do all of that. So it was just an amazing reading. And it is in her book, the whole story, the whole things that he came up with. So, yeah, he's always been around, but I've also been attracting more and more people into my life who are psychics, who have helped me develop it more as well. But, you know, I meet one of my best friends I met in 2013, and the first time I met her, she went, "Who's sitting on your shoulder?" And, you know, we had this amazing conversation, and Dan's very naughty with her, actually. One time I had a birthday party, and she said, "Look, I will come, but I'm going to have a sleep first." And he ended up waking her up saying, "Mum's waiting for you, you get up." And she's like, "I don't let you guys into my house." So she was not happy, but she said, "Oh, it's only because it's you." So, yeah. So he's naughty. But, yeah, I guess they all are. I'm sure Christian is too, isn't he?
Well, that's what I was just thinking, as you were saying that, like with Christian, where you were talking about Dan going into the work site, into the building site, saying hello to everybody, walking around, that's exactly what Christian would have done. And that cheekiness, that's definitely, they're very well matched. And they were the same age. They were both 27 when they passed over.
Oh, wow. But he passed a couple of years before, though, didn't he?
Yeah, Christian was in 2003. But yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But the
so
same
2003. So what's that? He was born in what?
75.
75, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's 9 years older than Dan, because he was 84. So yeah, which is right, yeah.
So now you now communicate with Dan.
Yeah, it's more through. I just get whispers in my ear, like I got on the first day that he died. I get obviously I have a lot of people around me as well who tell me things. I get downloads at night that come in. You know, I give him credit for everything I've done, so much so that my dad actually roused on me and go, "I do things as well. It's not just Dan that's helping you." So I say, "Okay, I'll give you all the car spaces that I get and all that sort of stuff. I'll stop saying thank you, Dad. I'll give all them to you." It's just easier, and that's the main way that I do. But I'm doing more and more spiritual development as I go on, and I'm just really listening. It's dragonflies are Dan's, rainbows are Dan's. Like the day of his funeral, oh, my God, we had rainbows anywhere. And the amount of people either going to the wake or from the wake, I reckon that because we would have had over 100 people there. But and I reckon half of them saw Dan number plates, license plates, either to the wake or from the wake. They kept saying, I kept seeing these Dan number plates. I was in New Zealand once with a group, and I went out early with my girlfriend, and we were like she decided to run back, and I said, I'll walk back. And on the footpath, into the cement was a Dan sort of thing. So, which was amazing, because what I was doing there, it was just like I got his tick, all that sort of stuff. But he just shows up all the time. In photos, oh my God, in family photos. At Josh's wedding, Dan is in the photos in the tree. And there's a group photo, and the guy at the back sort of like going like that with his thumb. And you follow the thumb, and it's where Dan is.
Oh, wow.
It's absolutely incredible. He shows up all the time in photos. And it's funny because I'm writing my book at the moment, which is Demystifying Loss, and I've put 3 photos in it, just showing him when we, at 5 years, so in 2016, we decided to release most of his ashes. So we released them into Sydney Harbour. I hired like a little ferry, and we all went out there and had a nice luncheon and stuff. And then we released them. And then there was a photo taken by one of my friends, and the next day there's Dan's face just near where we in the water, which is incredible.
Oh, wow. It's amazing, isn't it, how each sort of spirit energy finds a way to make themselves known. It's all very individual, and it's individual for you. And once you've got that connection, once you realize it, it's like, whoa, the whole thing blows open. Yeah.
Especially when you're about to do something that you haven't done before, and it's a little bit outside of your comfort zone. It's amazing how much they turn up. He turns up then as dragonflies, unbelievably so. And it's just like, oh my God. But sometimes I guess you don't see him. He's like literally comes straight at you into your like eyes, and it's like, okay, yeah, I've seen you now, sort of thing. But it is just incredible. And Josh has now got a little son, little Raphael, who will be 2 in a couple of in May, early May, and I just know that he was here one night and his parents were out, and we put him to bed, and then we went in the next door to make the bed up for his parents when they came back, and he's talking away. Like he's talking and talking and talking. And she goes, who's he talking to? And I said, oh, probably Dan. He's probably having fun with him and laughing and carrying on and whatnot. So, yeah.
Yes, because kids are a lot more open, aren't they? And they just go with it. And then adults and society go, oh, no, you can't be talking to Dan.
No,
That's ridiculous.
Isn't it sad that we do that?
It is, totally. Like your work that you now do with other people. So you went from so you had to face your grief, and I guess this is is the point where you're made redundant. So talk me through we haven't got a huge amount of time for this, but talk me through the sort of how you faced your grief.
So how I faced it was to avoid it, like most of us do, for a very, very long time. I'm fine. I've made a lot of silly decisions in that first year, 18 months, but that's okay. But then once I started to deep dive into my life coaching, originally it was for women. It was to help women stay as women, in executive roles, not to turn into a man and become aggressive like I did. That's where it started, but it never sort of took off. And then I was working with a marketing lady, and she said to me, Karen, look, why aren't you working with like grief? And I said, oh, funny you should say that. I was literally told that probably like back in 2013, early 2013, I was told this. And this was probably 17, early 18. And I was literally like, I was told that early on, but I was like, no, I don't want to be around those people. They're too sad. I'm not like that. But then I'm very much, if someone says something to me, I listen. I never used to, but I now know, no, you need to listen to this. It's a bit unusual. So that's when I started to deep dive into loss, and I started to find a couple of different ways, different modalities that I wanted to bring together. And obviously I was the guinea pig to start with. And I have to say, it's a most amazing progress. And some of it I got from I got it from about 3 or 4 different places, because I'm not going to say it's just one place or the other, but I've got it from a lot of proven places. And then I've just mixed it together, added some more flavour, and then put my sort of thing to it. So the gift of loss process that I have, it's a 5-step process. So the first one is to stop, right? We don't stop. We just keep going. That if you look back at the pandemic, it was stop. You got to stop. You got to stop being busy. Nothing is going to happen until you stop, and you got to start to do that deep dive. And of course, the stopping is all about you actually going, okay, this has happened. What does it mean for me now and moving forward? Until you stop, you can never answer that question because you're avoiding it. And we're so good at avoidance. Like, seriously, just look at the alcohol industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the suicide rate. We don't know how to do it. So the first step in my gift of loss is to stop. The second is to accept. And this is where you take responsibility for your part in whatever has happened. Now, there's over 40 different loss events, so it's not just death of a loved one. It could be a divorce, a job loss, your health, your wealth, your pets, come back to the pandemic, loss of freedom, loss of choice, loss of status, changing work conditions, changing recreational, changing, social activities, all of these things. That's just some of them, and it's like when you look at it, you go, oh my God. And most people don't realise that some of these are loss. But when it happens to you, because you don't realise this is a grieving situation, you start with what's wrong with me? Why can't I get over this? It's because you're not doing the grief process of actually stopping, accepting, and then the third step is to identify. And the identify is where you deep dive into all of this undelivered communication. in this relationship. So in every relationship, there's two people, but there's three components. There's the physical, the way you hang out together, the things you do, the way you touch each other, the things you say. Then there's the emotional, and that's all encompassing of all of your feelings, the good, the bad, the glad, and the sad. And then the third component is the spiritual. It's the intangible. You know you're connected. You don't understand why you're so instantly connected to this person, place, or thing. When the loss event occurs, all that you lose is the physical relationship. The emotional and the spiritual goes on forever. But it's the emotional relationship because we don't know how to deal with it. And we don't allow the emotions to do what they're designed to do, to come in and move out. Energy, emotion. Your emotions are your friends. They're actually giving you a message. You need to heal this. Like, you need to heal the fact that you didn't do this when you were meant to, or you didn't say this, or you didn't take this trip. You need to forgive. You need to apologize, you need to forgive, and you need to acknowledge. And that's what that identify is all about, is to identify all of those things that are from this relationship. Now, if it's a relationship, it could be your whole life relationship, like with your parents, or it could be a friend that you've only known for 2 years. But it's about deep diving into the length of that relationship and figuring out what are all of those things that you want to bring into that thing. And then you complete the relationship by delivering this amazing communication, never to the person if they're alive, but you deliver it to someone out loud. And then the fifth step is to pivot. And that's where you do the amazing thing of actually going, right, this is where I am and this is where I want to be. So what are the action steps, the skills? What do I need to learn? How do I need to grow to get from where I am today to where I want to be? Not just in your life, but in every single area of your life, because there's a different action step for all of them. And that's my gift to loss process, which I just so love.
So you've worked through, I mean, it's a lot like the process I use with clients as well. It's like that is the process that I had to go through. That was the process I was shown, which with Christian. And so you had to experience it.
Yeah, I had to do it. And
while you're
and the
working
thing about it is, even, and you probably found exactly the same thing, Hannah, that when you look at your loss event history, like everything that's happened, you know, we're all going to have multiple loss events. And when you look at it before you just say, well, this is the first one I want to work on, you know, I had to go back, and the first one I actually worked on was the relationship that to the baby that I gave up at 16. That was my first relationship that I felt I required to heal first. Then I did my dad. Then I did my mum, but my mum's still alive. And then I did Dan. So you would think, well, you do Dan first, but no. And then I did the relationship with the adult daughter. But once I did the baby that I gave up, that helped the relationship with the adult daughter, because, you know, obviously we're all energetically connected. But it's about figuring out, because when you look at it, you go, oh, wow, it's because of this. You know, I worked with a lady who thought she was coming to me for her divorce, but after the process, she went, I've got to heal that relationship with my mother first, because she loved me, but never in the way that I wanted to be loved. And because I went looking for that love, I made not so ideal choices for my 30 years. She was 50 at the time. So that's, you know, and that's where she went, I've got to heal all that first. And that's what I love about it, because once you heal it, obviously you can then stop the pattern of repeating it, because you've got the message and you've got the understanding. So, so I'm sure it's similar to what yours is, because it's the time for us to heal this. So they're not just giving it to me, they're giving it to multiple people, because, you know, we've got nearly 8 billion people in the world. There's a lot of people that require healing.
And it's exactly this time where you and I have been connected, and like this podcast is collecting a lot of other people as well. Yes. And it is the time to learn how to deal with grief, how to build a grief ritual that we can all work to. You know, we are all going to have these losses. That is it.
We're all going to have it. We're going to keep getting them.
And to find like the positive from
Yes.
the grief, like the gift of loss. So instead of
Yeah.
thinking about it as a loss event and concentrating on that and stagnating, and I did all of that, you did all of that,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
got shown a
Yeah.
different way of doing it, of a
Yeah.
way to heal and
And-
transform. Yeah.
And well, we live in a world of duality. So you can't have, dark without light. You can't have bad without good. So we focus on the negative where it says, no, there is some positive here. Sure, it may be a little thing down here, but the more you focus on that little thing down here, the more that you can start to expand it and get to gratitude. And because at the end of the day, it's love and gratitude. And that's, love, joy, gratitude, all those amazing vibrations.
Yeah, and then it affects everybody. So it's not just for you, is it? It affects your family, your community, and boom, boom, boom. It goes
the
out.
whole world. We're so connected. It's a ripple effect, and that's why I've taken. For a long time, I ignored my CFO skills, my accounting skills, all that sort of stuff. But now, in the last, probably last 6 to 8 months, I've started to bring it back together, and I've created what's called the People and Profits Connection. And into businesses to say, do you know what? You want your people to rock up each and every day. You want them to be productive. You want them to be one-dimensional, and you want them just to do the work and go home. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. We're not one-dimensional. We're three-dimensional. They all have all of these losses going on in their life. They're drinking too much. They're doing all of these sort of unhealthy habits just to get through the day. How about, and it's not a therapy session, how about we actually assist your people to actually see things from a different perspective so that they can actually come to work the way you would like them to. Then they can go home, and they'll go home to a better home, and they won't be staying out all night drinking and all these sort of things. So it's just starting to sort of, get into places where they're going, you're right. We do need to look at things differently. And I'm not putting them on the couch, and I'm not doing a whole lot of all that sort of stuff, but I'm helping people to deep dive into themselves. And that's
so if anyone sort of wants to know more about you, because we're just about to run out of time,
Sorry.
have you got a website? No. It's been a complete joy. Have you got a website that you can direct people to?
Just go to the ChastonCentre.com. Obviously, you can see Chaston behind me.
Yeah.
So it's just literally the Chaston Centre, CENTRE for the Americans. It's RE, .com. And so just reach out to me. There's books to download. You can click on all of the different places. It'll take you all over the place. So
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Karen and Dan and Christian, and they're all there.
You.
It's been a complete joy, and I know I sort of worry about talking about what I do, but you just said, don't worry about it, because we are the awakened ones, and we have to be the light for other people. So thank you so much for joining us. Absolute pleasure. And I hope we work together at some point.
I'm sure we will.
I feel we will. So thank you to Karen. Next week we have, actually, I'm not really sure what's going on next week, but I'm going to take a little break this week. So I've actually pre-recorded a few shows. So I shall, so the shows will each come out on Monday. It's just I'm going on a little holiday behind the scenes. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Karen. Okay, lots of love. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to The Finder of Lost Things. I think we've been triggered so long and so hard by COVID, and it's going to carry on. People are getting used to stillness, and they're getting used to more solitude. But how do you use that time for the highest good? This process that we're going to explore will bring back the joy and purpose to life. That wholeness, that sort of harmony and flow and togetherness. People are really ready to find their lost parts now. You can find me at hannahvelton.online.
Views expressed on this program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the station, its management, or advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.